Does anybody have any questions? All right, so how do you feel about sweatshops? Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine how many people want to buy sweat.
Don't think sweat, good market for sweat?
Right? Don't think there's a good market for sweat.
Sweatshops, good or bad? Good? Good for us? Okay. That's a good way to put it in perspective. In what respect, Alex?
Cheap clothing.
Cheap clothing, okay.
Just cheap products in general.
Lesser expensive products.
Because you imagine how much we had to pay for t-shirts.
There was just something on t-shirts today on the news, actually, that in Bangladesh, the NPR is doing some sort of study, and they figured out that it's $2 to get your t-shirts made in Bangladesh. $1.50 of that $2 is to the cotton and to the materials, and about 50 cents is left over for all kinds of labor, overhead of the company maybe, and labor. So a lion's share of the 50 cents into covers the labor. So, and kind of misleading a little bit. Like, oh, well, 50 cents, that just seems so small that it's not fair. You know, we're abusing labor and stuff. But, I mean, they didn't even talk about whether that takes the laborers 2 minutes or an hour or whatever to do the stitching for that particular piece. So they really didn't put it into a proper context at all. So, and then there's a number of other issues at hand. What about the workers? So maybe we feel bad buying the t-shirt, and you're even willing to pay a little bit more for a t-shirt if you knew that the workers were better compensated. Is that the case? Does that make sweatshops bad or good? Or all right. Well, those are some of the issues. We're gonna watch a video. And see what this says here.
Sweatshops. There are a lot of young Americans who want to rid the world of them. They're demanding that rules be passed to improve workers' lives. So who can say, give me a break to that? John, of course.
Of course. And I do, Barbara, because rules that in theory will make work better, in reality can make work disappear. Last month, there were big protests in Cancun, Mexico during the meeting of the World Trade Organization. They always protest, wherever this meeting is held. And protests are being supported by increasing numbers of American students who say workers are being mistreated. Sweatshops are what they object to most. Factories like this one in Bangladesh, where adolescent girls make sweaters and are paid a fraction of American wages. The protesters seem to be winning the battle of public opinion. In 1996, they made Kathy Lee Gifford cry by saying she was exploiting these young workers in Honduras who made her clothing line.
I'm supposed to be personally responsible for everything that happens around the world, in Honduras.
Yes, say protesters like these. Within weeks, Kathy Lee was admitting the error of her ways. She joined President Clinton at the White House as she renounced the mistakes of her past.
That was one blouse and one pant too many.
The student groups who protest get some funding from labor unions. The Steelworkers Union lets one group use part of their offices in Washington, D.C. Maybe that's why the protesting students are also upset about wages in America. This group once took over the office of Harvard's president and held it for 3 weeks, demanding higher wages for workers at the school. Their supporters camped outside, and even big-time actors, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, showed up to give their support. Senator Ted Kennedy came out and shook the students' hand. One of the leaders of this protest was Ben McKean. He assembled this group of student leaders to tell us what they're upset about.
The workers themselves have come to us and said, you benefit from our exploitation, give us back something.
And if we can tell the corporations that we don't want to buy products that are being made by people that they're able to exploit, then we can really help to end some of the serious problems affecting these people's lives.
Oh, that sounds very nice, except when we talk to some people who live in the places where the workers are supposedly being exploited in sweatshops, we heard a different story.
I wish these people would begin to think with their brains rather than with their hearts.
Rebecca Roy is an economist who lives in India. We interviewed him and these other supporters of globalization as they were on their way to Cancun.
I don't understand the expression sweatshops. There's nothing wrong with sweat. Sweat is good. Sweat is what most people in the developing world, including India, do all the time.
People get jobs in these places, then their generation lives better than their parents live.
Chunarunga studies trade policy. She lives in Kenya.
Doesn't the United States have a responsibility to stop these companies from exploiting people in your country?
Exploiting people? Nobody in my country thinks about companies exploiting them. When there's a new company opening a factory, people are excited about it.
Arunga and DeBroy point out that in poor countries, the Nike factories that well-fed American students call sweatshops routinely pay twice what local factories pay, and more than triple what people earn doing much harder and more dangerous work in the fields.
I wish we would have more sweatshops, quote unquote, in my country.
Most economists say what many Americans call sweatshops are what allowed people in now thriving places like South Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong to pull themselves out of poverty. People start in the sweatshops, but then they moved on to better jobs.
Most of them work for these companies for a while, go off and start their own businesses. It's a win-win situation for everyone.
And that, she says, is why the students who protest are ignorant and clueless.
They have no idea what they're talking about. They're comparing that to what they have in their rich homes.
They call people like you ignorant and clueless. Rich, ignorant, and clueless.
The image that we have as being rich and clueless and just idealist college students is a false one. Do I have a vision of how I want the world to be? Sure, of course I do. I want the world to be one where people don't have to struggle to feed their children. The workers are forced to migrate into the city or into places where factories like these exist.
Who's forcing them? They travel to the factory. They choose to work there.
I mean, you would prefer eating to not eating.
Sure, but if you insist on higher wages, some of these factories will close. You're going to put people out of work.
We're not trying to close down sweatshops. We're trying to
Yes,
change
you are.
sweatshops.
I mean, you say you're not, but that's the result of your protest. Some places will close. They'll go where the wages are lower.
The goal is to raise the wages across the board.
The protesters say that they don't want to take away the jobs. They just want to make them better.
By passing laws trying to improve the jobs by force, they will get rid of the jobs.
After the protests against Kathy Lee's clothing line, Walmart withdrew its Kathy Lee contract from a New York factory, taking work away from these workers. American complaints about child labor persuaded factories in Bangladesh to stop hiring adolescents. The result, according to UNICEF, is that many of the young girls turned to prostitution instead. These protests help poor people? Give me a break.
Okay, so what does it come down to? What does our feelings of the conditions come down to? Our opinions versus their opinions. How do they differ? Where do our, feelings come from on this issue?
Our standards.
Our standards, and what about their feelings on it?
Their standards.
Their standards, right? Which are different. We're kind of in two different worlds. So to compare the U.S. ideal situation or work conditions or whatever, it kind of comes down to that all-important thing that we learned in Chapter 2, opportunity cost. What would you be doing if you're not doing what you're doing, right? And so they said in the video about the young girls, that doesn't sound like a good alternative. Of course, not all of them would be doing that, but what other opportunities are there? As long as the decision to work was what? That we kind of can hopefully sit back and say that, it's probably not too bad. their decision to work at that factory, as long as it was what does that help us think that maybe it was an improvement rather than a bad situation? What was true about their decision? That it was voluntary. It comes back to voluntary behavior. I mean, if somebody is if they're forced into it, that's a whole different ballgame. So when we see situations of coercion and the human trafficking stuff that goes, that's all bad stuff. But this is completely different. This is a new factory opening up in a town. They take applications just like the United States. Nobody's being forced to do it. They're coming there. So that, from kind of an economic theory perspective, should make us feel a little bit better about the situation. If we start to learn more that people were coerced and that there's bad things going on, that's a different ballgame. But in and of itself, having a little bit of sweat going on while you're doing work, I know I've taken some good joy from having some sweat going on while I'm working. So, okay, other comments or questions about the video?
I do think that perspective, though, doesn't take into account the cultural and economic forces that give them few, if no, choices. So, yeah, we have first world problems that we're assigning to third world countries. And to say that it's voluntary doesn't take into account those cultural and economic forces.
Yes, and I agree with you. So then, one way to, I think about it is to make sure that we're not making it worse, that potentially we're making it better. And in economics, what is better? More choice or less choice? More choice. In general, this would be if we go back to the utility chapter and we think about the underlying behavior, if you have more choices at your disposal, then you have more opportunities to better your situation. Does that make sense? The more constraints we put on you, the less choices, the smaller your opportunities are. So in general, if we go into a situation, and there might be long-term effects that we need to, if these factories come in and we go back to a buddy-buddy system with whoever's running that country and the large corporation, and so maybe there's some dynamic elements to it, because we do have to fall back to the virtue of competition in the marketplace. I mean, that's really what capitalism is all about, is competition to protect the consumers. Pro-capitalism is not pro-business. Let me say that again. Pro-capitalism, if you're a fan of capitalism, you may not be a fan of big business. Those two things do not imply each other. In fact, business people like to maybe be anti-capitalist, because what do they want to do? They want to create a monopoly. They want to knock out the competition. They want to be the lone survivor. Well, in a lot of respects, that's anti-capitalist. So there's a big problem, I think, in the United States that I'm trying to overcome by teaching all these years and stuff, that the market system is different than what people think. People usually associate capitalism with big business, and they think of people being put into positions, but hopefully you've learned through this course that that's exactly what capitalists don't want to see, if you really understand capitalism. We want to keep competition alive and keep things efficient, which then the benefits go out to the masses through their consumption. Okay, any other comments or questions on the video? I got another one for you. Since this is our resource chapter, men pay versus women pay. Which one's bigger?
Bigger.
On average, yeah, bigger, better. That's a good question. On average, men across the board get paid a little bit more than women. On a big average, if we aggregate the data. Within certain industries, that may not be true. But this one's going to take a look at that question, because it's fairly common knowledge that that's true. And what's the usual reason that we point to of women earning less than men? Okay, maternity. What else? Maybe historically, even if it's less today, but historically, why have men made more than women?
Which would be sexism.
What's that? Sexism, that's right. Yeah, it's been somehow a good old boys club, and they just hire the men. Now, is that a profitable thing to do? Is that a profitable thing to do in all cases, to always hire the guy? No, of course not, right? So why do we tend to get this result? There's a lot of economists have spent a lot of time on these issues, so we're going to take a little 4-minute video here and check this one out. Whoops,
Another contemporary economic myth is that Another contemporary economic myth is that women make 75 cents for every dollar men make because they're discriminated against in labor markets. Like other myths, this does have a kernel of truth to it. So for example, if you add up all the incomes of women and divide by the number of women in the labor force, and then do the same thing for men, what you'll find is on average, women do make about 75% of what men do. What's happening here is not discrimination in the labor market, but differences in the choices that men and women make about investing in their knowledge, their education, their skills, and their job experience that lead to them getting paid different salaries. Economists talk about people's human capital. By human capital, we mean the knowledge, the skills, the education, and the job experience that people have. And economics argues that people get paid wages according to that human capital. It turns out that men and women invest very differently in their human capital. And we can see that in 4 different ways. First of all, educational choices. Men, for example, tend to go into fields like engineering. Women tend to go into social sciences, into psychology, into nursing. And so where men are making higher salaries as engineers or perhaps in the business world, women tend to end up in jobs in which their salaries are somewhat lower. So even though they may have the same years of schooling, the different choices they've made about their majors lead to them working in different areas and getting paid differently. Secondly, men and women have different expectations about work. For example, if women expect down the road to take time off to raise children, they'll make different choices today about what kinds of skills they acquire than if they imagine they'll be working full-time for the rest of their lives. And we know historically that many women in the 1960s and 70s didn't imagine that they would be working full-time at age 40 and ended up making choices that led them to have jobs when they were working at age 40 that didn't pay as well as they might have otherwise. Younger women today, of course, are more likely to imagine themselves working at age 40 and therefore make different investments today. Another difference between men and women is full versus part-time work. Women are much more likely than men to work part-time, men are more likely to work full-time. And part-time work, even for the same kinds of jobs, tends to pay less than full-time work. And women tend to prefer part-time work more than men because women still tend to take on the majority of the responsibility for children and money. Finally, men and women differ in terms of their tenure on a job or the way in which their careers get interrupted. If it's the case that women take time off from the workforce to raise children, that will have an impact on their salaries down the road. So we put these 4 things together, what we get is that the difference between men and women's pay is not a result of labor market discrimination, but of the choices that men and women make before they enter the labor market, or even when they're in the labor market, about the kinds of jobs they want to have and the way they want to balance of family and work. Studies that have tried to control for all these factors have shown that if you take a man and a woman, same experience, same education, same job, and compare their salaries, what you find is that women make about 98% of what men do. So that gender wage gap pretty much disappears. And in some jobs, women actually make more. Now, it might well be the case that women are being discriminated against or that sexism is a problem in the choices that women make. For example, girls are guided away from math classes and guided into other kinds of classes. It's also certainly the case that our expectations about women's roles versus caring for children in the household and men's roles about caring for children in the household are very different. And if we think those are poor choices, if we want to see women's pay more equal to men, what we need to do is convince more women to go into areas such as the sciences and mathematics and engineering, and we need to convince men to take more responsibility for children in the house. When those begin to even out, we'll see wages begin to even out as well. But in the meantime, whatever choices men and women make, the wages they're paid in the market will reflect the productivity associated with those choices and are not the result of discrimination.
Okay, questions or comments on that one? Any surprises? Now, there'll be a number of studies that people will come up with over the years that might be able to dispute this. So this is some evidence from what various economists have done. I think his last point towards the end is more of the cultural issue. You know, do we steer women into one direction or the other? Ends up being more of a cultural type of question. I think we have a very passionate scientist here in Dr. Epp. If you guys, how many have had Dr. Epp for class, right? She's good, wanting to get more women in the sciences, and she's very passionate about that. So that's where it really starts, and it probably starts at a much younger age of getting people exposed to a variety of things. So, all right. Anything else? Nothing on gender?
Well, you just don't want to get me started.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. Well, I got one more. This is an old video that talks about a few different issues with gender, so maybe we'll get you guys fired up. This is back in 77 or something, late 70s. So this issue of equal pay for equal work was a hot topic back in the 70s.
Equal pay for equal work laws are a source of apartheid. You know, the basic source of apartheid in South Africa was the insistence by trade unions on equal pay for equal work. The women who go around today urging equal pay for equal work are being anti-feminist. They don't intend to be, but that is the effect of their policy. Because if there is any activity in which, for any reason, a male is preferable to a female, or vice versa, the only weapon the less productive sex has is to offer to work for less. And if you deny them that opportunity, you're assuring yourself that you're going to have all male jobs, or all female jobs, or all white jobs, or all black jobs.
But aren't you also condemning them to stay that way?
Not at all. Not at all. The typical course, if you go back to American history, by taking these low-paid jobs, a great many people, not all, but a great many people were able to develop skills and activities, accumulate a little skill, a little capital, a little knowledge, improve their lives, become advance in the stage, get to a higher level of productivity, and get a higher income. That's been the typical way up the ladder for most of the people who came in. It was a way up the ladder for my parents, for your parents, or grandparents, or great-grandparents, I don't know which. And that's the way in which, unfortunately, there's no way in which you can immediately propel people to the top of the ladder.
Okay, thanks very much.
Mr. Friedman, referring to the statements that you made about women who advocate equal pay for equal work.
Gee, I thought I'd get a rise out of that, sir. Delighted to have it.
Yes, okay, I just would like to know if you're insinuating, or perhaps, point blankly saying that women and other minorities' skills are inferior to those of those now holding those jobs, and that they need to go through a period where their skills need to be improved and therefore deserve to be paid less?
No, I don't think desert has anything to do with it. I'm not, first of all, I think desert is an impossible thing to decide. Who deserves what? Nobody deserves anything. Thank God we don't get what we deserve. But I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying a very different thing. I'm saying that the actual effect of requiring equal pay for equal work will be to harm women. If women's skills are higher than men's in a particular job and are recognized to be higher, the law does no good. Because then they will be able to compete away and can get the same income. If their skills are less for whatever reason, maybe it isn't because it's their sex, maybe it's because they were out of the labor force, maybe it's for other reasons. And you say the only way you are able to hire them is by paying the same wage, then you're denying them the only weapon they have to fight with. If the unwillingness of the men to hire them is because the men are sexist, what's the phrase, racist, sexist pigs or whatever, if that's the only reason they want to hire them, nonetheless, you want to make it costly to them to exercise their prejudice. If you say to them, you have to pay the same wage no matter whether you hire women or men, then here's Mr. Sexist Pig. It doesn't cost him anything to hire men instead of women. However, if the women are free to compete and to say, well, now look, I'll offer my work for less, then he can only hire men if he bears a cost. If the women are really good as a man, then he's paying a price for discriminating. And what you are doing, not intentionally, but by misunderstanding, when you try to get equal pay for equal work laws, is what you are doing is reducing to zero the cost imposed on people who are discriminating for irrelevant reasons. And I would like to see a cost imposed on them. I'm on your side, but you're not.
All right, so what'd you think of that one? Yeah. Oh, you're high-fiving? What's your high-five about? She just got burned. Okay. So what was he getting at in terms of the equal pay for equal work? How does it work against the person being discriminated against? How does it work against them?
Because regardless of what the reasoning of the person who is giving less pay is, if you say you have to pay them extra, well, as you said, especially in perfect competition, there's an endless pool from which to choose from. And if I am prejudiced, then I can just choose the people I don't like at that point. People I do like at that point over the people I don't.
So what is the cost that's imposed on the evil person? The good worker for, yeah, and so it's the opportunity cost, right? So there's, again, an implicit cost that they're missing out. Now, since we're in the labor market then, what would be the longer term impact of that, of allowing it to float rather than to pass legislation on that? Thinking about competition, how does the market evolve for the party that's being discriminated against if they are having to now, for starters, accept a little bit lower pay for equal work? What happens over time? Okay, their skills might go up if there's a skill argument, but there's something even kind of separate from that. And it's kind of a subtle thing, but I think it brings up some important issues. So let me make it, I guess, kind of obnoxious, but let's say that the low-paid person is over here making $10. But they're more productive, and another person's over here at 15 at a different firm. So this is these are the company discrim, and this is company fair. So company fair is over here paying $10 because they just pick the best person for the job, whether it doesn't matter the color of the skin or their gender, they're going to pay the person who's the best. They're also a profit maximizer, which we're not putting into the evil category, at least I'm not. And so they're going to take the best person for the job at the lowest pay. What happens over time as this market evolves if this company is paying consistently more because they've got the cost embodied of practicing their discrimination? What happens over time if this is a labor-intensive market where these guys are paying $5 more per hour to get the same work done by less productive people? What market forces happen over time? Think about entry and exit.
Well, couldn't it be the same productive, like just as productive, they're just being paid more?
Let's say they are just as productive. And I'm paying, company fair is paying $10, and we're kind of looking a little bizarrely at this, right? Well, if they're fair, they'd pay more. No, they're paying the market rate. They don't care who they hire. but they're paying 10. The discriminator's paying 15.
Then the people who fit within the group would flee to the $15 job, and then lots of people who are left would get into the fair job.
Okay, and what about the long-term? What are both these companies looking to maximize?
Profit.
Profit. Who's going to make more money? Who's going to be able to offer lower prices for their goods? What are these guys going to be forced to do over time? Exit, or start hiring these other productive people. And then wages will start to equalize on their own. So that is the kind of the market correction that may take a while to do. So maybe there's some policies, depending on what the status quo is, that need to kind of kickstart this thing. But that would be kind of the natural progression. Okay, any other questions or comments on that? That's kind of what Friedman was bringing up, is that we're able to impose a cost on those people by not having policies interfere. Okay. There was an interesting paper. I think I might have even mentioned it before, but how many of you have seen, I want to see it. I haven't been able to see it yet, the Jackie Robinson film that just came out in the last year. Anybody see that? A few hands? Okay. So I went to a conference, well, this was a couple years ago. It was before the movie came out. And this economist wrote a paper, and the title of the paper was, "Who Broke the Race Barrier in Major League Baseball, Jackie Robinson or Adam Smith?" So Jackie Robinson or Adam Smith. That was the title of his paper. So what do you think, knowing what Friedman just argued here? It's kind of a similar story. How did the race barrier get broken in terms of this guy's opinion? Not to take anything away from the awesome Jackie Robinson, by the way, which he did in a very good way too. But what market forces were at play? So baseball. What do baseball teams want to do? What's their objective? Win. But now, what do the baseball owners want to do? Make money. So we're back to the profit maximization paradigm. But there seems to be a strong correlation between winning and making money, right? Those two things kind of go together. So if I put together a winning team, I tend to make more money. So there's kind of the connection there. So what happened over time? Started winning with, why? With Jackie Robinson, right? So we have a talent pool in what was the Negro League at the time, right? Of some super talented guys that were untapped. And so the Adam Smith part of the story is some owners who were these guys are saying, I want the best guy on the field at the time. So that market forces of chasing profits. In order to get profits, I need wins. In order to get wins, I need the most talented people on the field, helped to break down the race barriers in baseball, was the claim of his paper. And of course, Jackie Robinson played a huge role in that as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing the movie. But I've read and learned a little bit about it over time. So, good movie, by the way. Excellent. Yeah, everybody's shaking their head. Yeah. All right. So, some interesting things thinking about market forces, and things aren't always what they are on the outside. Some things that sound well-intended may have implications that are hard to figure out without thinking about the economics behind it and the behaviors and the incentives of individuals. Okay, so let's knock out the evaluations today.